So I wanted to talk a little more about reincarnation, rebirth. Rebirth is a nicer word, I think. And today I wanted to talk about lots of things, but essentially I want to begin by talking about this notion of karma. It's a beautiful notion, karma. Karma and responsibility. You know, it's interesting because modern psychology, I don't mean kind of transpersonal and, more progressive psychology, but the sort of traditional psychology essentially blames our life, our personality on our heredity, and that's our DNA, and our environment. And that, in a way, what it does is it allows you to transfer blame off yourself in some respect, in some subtle way. And if there's such a thing as karma, which is obviously a teaching that came from Buddha and other ancient religions, then karma says that you can't transfer blame outside yourself in any way. You can't transfer blame for anything. In fact, it's all on you. And it doesn't mean it's your fault. It just means that it's for you, by you. And more than that, and as well, that you actually have before you the perfect ingredients for the next phase of your growth, of your evolution. That's really the essence of what karma is about. And it's rooted perhaps in this tradition of the ancient tradition of initiation, that initiation is based on this idea that we are evolving spiritually, not just physically, but also we're evolving spiritually. And that as we evolve through a world of frequencies, the universe made of frequencies. And every now and again, we transcend the level that we're on and we move to a higher plateau of frequency. And that shift, that paradigm shift, is called an initiation. And sometimes they're sudden and sometimes they're very, very slow. And, initiations used to be structured in ancient mystery schools. Now, in a way, the secret of initiation is an open secret, because now initiation takes place in everyday life. In fact, it always did, but now it's completely informal in that way. So when we're talking about rebirth or the notion of reincarnation, and we're taking that in as a worldview, we have to talk about the notion of soul. What we call, some religions call the soul. In my teachings, in the Gene Keys, I call this the causal body. The causal body is a body, a subtle body, a higher dimensional body that is part of who we are, and it's the part that survives death, right? So, some other teachings call it, a rather nice term, the permanent atom. I like that. It's almost like there's one atom inside us that survives death, always, and it goes on, this one atom. And in a sense, that's your causal body, this kind of subtle essence that maintains a kind of evolutionary story as it incarnates and reincarnates. And the thing about this body, this sheath, this atom, is that you get to polish it over the eons. Because as you come in and out of form, the whole of your life, the whole of one lifetime, can be devoted to the polishing of a single virtue. The whole of one life. Think of your life now. Maybe you're here just to polish a single virtue. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe you've been given the challenge of forgiveness. Maybe it's sacrifice. Maybe it's self-love. Maybe it's developing some kind of incredible art or music or some other great form of service that you are here to perfect in this life. Perhaps it's self-forgiveness. That seems to be a pretty universal one. And ways of tackling the trauma that life brings us and how we do that. And in a way, what happens through this notion of incarnation is that we take on a wound, a core wound, and we take it on for the sake of the whole. The Kabbalists call this the tikkun olam, We come here to repair the world, to repair a broken part of the world, and we are an aspect of that wound. So it's about allowing our suffering to cut us so deeply that it cleans us, that it awakens us, and we're here then to transcend the suffering. Think of, the intense grief that some of us have to go through. It might be the loss of a loved one or even the loss of a child. The intensity of those kinds of grief and how those levels of grief can propel us to a higher initiation, to a higher level of consciousness where we become aware suddenly of the transcendent. So, I was amazed recently because someone told me, I read somewhere that in the UK, where we're a very conservative, reserved group of people, 1 in 3 people believe in angels. I was like, really? Is that absolutely true? Can it be possible? They're very quiet about it in this materialistic culture from which I come from. But in a way that was very revealing to me, because it means that there's a suspicion in us, even in a very material, scientific-based, culture, the modern culture we live in, that's all based on, looking out there and fulfillment, external fulfillment. There's some kind of deep suspicion in us about there may be more, there may be something we want. People want to believe in angels. And in a way, science and materialism, it can do a great damage, even for all its gifts and wonderful things it brings us. It can really damage these subtler worldviews. Think of the perfection of this notion of reincarnation, and it's like there's a saying, a ring pass not. It's like a ring pass not. It means that we don't remember as a whole our previous lives, because as we come through into the form, we forget them, but then when we go out we remember them again. But then when we come through the veil, we forget them again. Could you invent a more perfect and beautiful game? Really? Theatre? So as your awareness grows, as you transcend the thoughts, the opinions, the worldviews that you've taken on, as you open up these more ancient memories, maybe they're not specific, maybe they're more general. The causal body then becomes more resplendent, it becomes more shining. In every life you're given one of these tasks, a higher purpose to fulfill. And how do we find that? How do we find what our higher purpose is? In a way, we find that through realizing that every event in our life is pointing us directly at that higher purpose. Every event, especially the suffering. It's not just suffering for the sake of suffering. That suffering is pointing you toward a higher purpose. And think how much light might lie in that lump of coal that you've been given. And this is the alchemy of rebirth. We have lives of suffering, and in a way, you might say that some of us are just doing time, like in a prison sentence, for dark deeds that we've done in the past. And there may be some truth in that, because that's how karma operates. But then there are also the possibility that if you're a more advanced soul, let's say, or, let's say you have more shine and radiance because you've done more work or whatever, however we could understand that, then you might also choose to take on more suffering, more intense suffering. And how might you tell those two people apart? It's from how they deal with it. How do they deal with suffering? Because there are those that cave in and just give way and blame others and become lost in the suffering and hopeless. And then there are those who rise through it. And perhaps this is explained by individual karma and collective karma. There's such a thing as both individual and collective. Once you've purified the individual karma, you take on the collective karma. That's the more advanced version. You take on the karma of the whole, because you've burnt up all your own, from the past memories of deeds and things that you did. And then that collective karma has a different quality to it. In some respects it feels more weighty, but it also feels less connected to you. So together all human beings are actually sharing in the karma of the whole. All deeds belong to all humans, to all of us, and then these higher souls may come in and they may take on more of it for the sake of the whole. This is the Christ impulse. This is the metaphor, or the realization of the Christ. And once the soul has, passed all the exams here in the earth school, then they leave the university and then they enter into the universal, into the eternal, into that line of, that line of consciousness is now permanently aware of itself as eternal. It's woken up in the game. So it's graduated in this sphere, and it can move on to higher spheres and higher levels of union and wholeness until it merges with the entirety, with God, with the divine, if you like. So the earth is the ultimate classroom in that respect. And consciousness incarnates, and it incarnates from pure eternal awareness down into the deep material realms. And it forgets itself so that it can remember itself. It dives into the illusion of time and space, what the ancients call the Maya. And we think it's real, time and space. We're governed by it. And yet in our causal body we have a memory of eternity, If consciousness didn't do this, there would be no story. If there was no time and no space, there'd be no story. There'd be no dance. There'd be no theatre. So this is the purpose of the highest, the higher human perception, to pierce through the storylines of incarnation and rise up through them. You might ask, what's the point? What's the point in this? But we actually can't really ask why. I mean, you can ask. Why is the quintessential human question, and only our ascension and our transcendence can answer why. And we may find that there is no answer. It just is. But, just is doesn't satisfy the human mind. It only satisfies the divine mind, which can accept simply just what is, the will of the whole, the mystery of the whole. So consider your life from this perspective of rebirth. What are you dealing with right now, and how are you dealing with it? What marks are you getting in your exams? There's always room for improvement. You can always sit the same exam again and again and again. Are you going to come back? Why not excel in your exams? Why not assume everything is your responsibility? Everything is for you. Every drama is created by your higher self so that you can transform it and transcend it. This is the central message of my teachings of the Gene Keys. Every shadow contains a gift. So how many diamonds can you find in the darkness of your life, in the coalface of your suffering? And once you start finding them, only then can you begin working for the wider whole. And then you can help others find their diamonds. And then we live lives of deep service. We wish only to serve the whole and to transform the darkness around us. And then we ask the great compassionate question: what is the highest service I can offer the whole during this life, during this incarnation? What is the highest service I can offer the whole? And we live that question.